are going to talk about faithfulness this morning. That's the next part of the fruit of the Spirit. And a whole lot can be said about faithfulness, being faithful. We've done it probably at the start of every class, so no sense in doing it any different today. I want to get your thoughts on when you picture a faithful person, whatever you want to. Maybe you've had a faithful car or a faithful refrigerator. Obviously, those things aren't as important as a faithful person, but when you think about that, what comes to mind if you were to try to explain to someone what does it mean to be faithful?
Never give up.
All right? Never give up. That's right. In essence, that's a good part of faithfulness. Okay?
Continual.
Yes, you're almost there.
Continual, right? Yeah, through thick and thin.
Someone you can depend on.
Pardon?
Someone anyhow, someone you can depend on.
Yeah, someone you can depend on, a trust. A faithful friend is that person you know will be there, whether it's easy or not. We speak of fair weather friends. Probably all got some of those, but
Support.
Support? All right. Still looking for one particular word.
No judgment.
No judgment. And even a faithful friend without judgment can say some hard things,
Oh,
can't
yeah.
they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Reliable.
Reliable. Yeah.
Is that-
Another. Go ahead. Let me give you some theological definitions. I like yours probably better. You get kind of at the heart of things, but faithfulness has the sense of confidence, certainty, trust, then trustworthiness, steadfast, dedicated, dependable, worthy of trust. Here's a longer paragraph to maybe give you some things to think about. The ordinary definitions of faith and believe, and by the way, they're related. The word, the noun for faith is used 243 times in the New Testament. You've got the noun, which is usually translated as faith, and the verb is usually translated believe or have faith. The ordinary definitions of faith and belief imply intellectual agreement with an idea or accepting something as truth. Sadly, sometimes that's all people think about, especially with belief. Well, I believe certain things, and that's part of it, but the Bible word means more than that. As used in the Bible, it also implies trust in and reliance on God or Christ, surrender our wills to God or Christ, and conduct consistent with that surrender. The idea is one of firmness and certainty, reliability. The word I like is loyalty. If I have faith, if I claim to have faith in God or faith in Christ, then that doesn't mean that I always do it right or that I never make a mistake. A faithful person can make a mistake, right? But I remain loyal to the one I put my trust in. The idea is one of firmness and certainty and reliability. The faithful person is the one you can count on. They are not only trustworthy and loyal, they have your back, and they're dependable, meaning they will be there when you need them because they're willing to follow through with commitment regardless of difficulty. Faithfulness doesn't give up when things get difficult. It doesn't change sides when you're losing. It doesn't throw people under the bus when it's no longer convenient to be their friend. In fact, the fruit of faithfulness enables us to stand strong in the face of difficulty. It calls us to persevere in doing what is right towards God and towards others, even when it's not easy or convenient. I like all of that, so I think we're kind of getting a sense of what we're talking about. God calls us to be faithful. Here's some facets I want you to think about this morning. Faithfulness counts in the little things as well as the big things. It's good to be faithful in the big things in life, but it's even better to be faithful in the little things. That works everywhere in life. It works in a marriage. It works in a family. It works in a church. Jesus said it this way in Luke 16:10, "He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much, and he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much." So maybe we could say it's being faithful in little things that allows us to be faithful in the bigger things. And Jesus praised people for having faith as small as a mustard seed. God can work with that. You might say, "Oh, my faith's not big enough to do that." Well, here's someone I want to share. Fred Craddock, in an address to ministers, caught the practical implications of consecration. "To give my life for Christ appears glorious," he said. "To pour myself out for others, to pay the ultimate price of martyrdom. I'll do it. I'm ready, Lord, to go out in a blaze of glory." We think giving our all to the Lord is like taking a $1,000 bill and laying it on the table. "Here's my life, Lord, I'm giving it all." But the reality, he says, for most of us is that he sends us to the bank and has us cash in the $1,000 for quarters. We go through, let's see, where are we at here? We go through life putting out 25 cents here and 50 cents there. Listen to the neighbor kid's troubles instead of saying, "Get lost." Go to a committee meeting. Give a cup of water to a shaky old man in a nursing home. Usually giving our life to Christ isn't glorious. It's done in all those little acts of love, 25 cents at a time. It would be easy to go out in a flash of glory. It's harder to live the Christian life little by little over the long haul. I would agree. You read the stories of the martyrs, and I'm impressed by that. But again, there's glory, if you will, in that person who gets up every morning, puts their boots or their high heels on or whatever you put on in the morning, sneakers, and you go to work being faithful for Christ in whatever comes your way that day, no matter whether it's a big thing or a little thing. So faithfulness counts in the little things as well as the big things. Remember that in life. Number 2, faithfulness is measured in commitment, not successes or failures. I think this is so important. We probably keep track of the wins and the losses. And there's probably some benefit in that. We all like to be successful and don't like to be reminded of our failures, but this is kind of what I was trying to get at a minute ago, when being faithful doesn't mean I'm always a winner in life. Hebrews 11, that great chapter on faith in the Bible, lists person after person that was viewed as faithful, yet they made their mistakes. You get to verse 13 of chapter 11 of Hebrews, and by then, the writer has already listed several people, and he goes on to list more, but in verse 13, speaking of those he's already mentioned, he says, "All these died in faith, without receiving the promises, but having seen them and welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on earth." People like Abraham had their failures. Noah had his failure. Every person in that list had successes and failures. It didn't mean that they weren't faithful, again, over the long haul. Here's another way to maybe think about it. This is from, this is a long one. Tim Hansel, in a book titled Holy Sweat. Listen to this story about someone named Clarence Jordan. Clarence Jordan was a man of unusual abilities and commitment. He had 2 PhDs, one in agriculture and one in Greek and Hebrew. So gifted was he could have chosen to do anything he wanted. He chose to serve the poor. In the 1940s, he founded a farm in Americus, Georgia, and called it the Koinonia Farm. It was a community for poor whites and poor blacks. As you might guess, such an idea did not go over well in the Deep South in the 40s. Ironically, much of the resistance came from good church people who followed the laws of segregation as much as the other folk in town. The town people tried everything to stop Clarence. They tried boycotting him and slashing workers' tires when they came to town. Over and over, for 14 years, they tried to stop Clarence Jordan. Finally, in 1954, the Ku Klux Klan had had enough of Jordan, so they decided to get rid of him once and for all. They came one night with guns and torches and set fire to every building on Koinonia Farm but Clarence's home, which they riddled with bullets. And they chased off all the families except one black family which refused to leave. Clarence recognized the voices of many of the Klansmen, and as you might guess, some of them were church people. Another was the local newspaper's reporter. The next day, the reporter came out to see what remained of the farm. The rubble was still smoldering, and the land was scorched, but he found Clarence in the field hoeing and planting. "I heard the awful news," he said to Clarence, "and I came out to do a story on the tragedy of your farm closing." Clarence just kept on hoeing and planting. The reporter kept prodding, kept poking, trying to get a rise from this quietly determined man who seemed to be planting instead of packing his bags. So finally the reporter said in a haughty voice, "Well, Dr. Jordan, you've got 2 of them PhDs, but you've got 14 years into this farm and there's nothing left of it at all. Just how successful do you think you've been?" Clarence stopped hoeing, turned toward the reporter with his penetrating blue eyes and said quietly but firmly, about as successful as the cross, sir. I don't think you understand us. What we're about is not success, but faithfulness. We're staying. Good day." Beginning that day, Clarence and his companions rebuilt Koinonia, and the farm is still going strong today. That's a great illustration, I think, of the idea of faithfulness. Didn't mean there weren't going to be gains and losses, or wins or failures. You keep going through the midst of them. That's being faithful to, at least in this idea of his cause and what he was trying to do. Faithfulness, again, is measured in commitment to what God has called you to do. Make sense? Faithfulness also means refusing to give up. That sounds pretty similar, but maybe there's a different facet here. You can give up when things are going bad. You can give up when things are going good. It's happened both ways. Revelation 2:10, Jesus writing to one of the 7 churches of Asia, he said this, "Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison so that you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Wow, that's a rough road. What does Jesus advise them to do? He says, "Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life." And I think in this context, probably the idea there about being faithful until death is not just the idea of living faithfully till the time you draw your last breath, whether that might be 80 years. That's a good thing to do. Here I think the context is the idea of be faithful even if it costs you your life.
That's all that can be in that text.
Yeah, I believe so. And the people I forget, I should have wrote down, which I don't have the order of the churches memorized. Is this Smyrna? Anyway, chapter 2, verse 10, you can look that up later. Jesus says, be faithful. And it's going to cost some of you your life to be faithful. Don't give up. Let me share another story here. This is by a book named Chicken Soup for the Soul. Some of you probably have that on your library shelf. Anyway, in 1989, a terrible earthquake almost flattened Armenia. That's an entire country. It killed over 30,000 people in less than 4 minutes. One father rushed to his son's school and found the building flat as a pancake. Standing there in tears, he remembered a promise he made to his son. No matter what, I'll always be there for you. And that probably hit the father's heart pretty hard right at that point, right? What is that going to mean then? It looked absolutely hopeless, but the dad went went to the back right corner and started digging in the pile of rubble. The other grieving parents tried to pull him off, saying, "It's too late, they're dead." But he kept digging for his son, stone by stone. He dug for 8 hours, then 12, then 24, then 36 hours without stopping. Finally, in the 38th hour, as he pulled back a boulder, guess what? He heard his son's voice. He screamed his son's name, "Armand!" And the and the voice answered him, "Dad, it's me, Dad." Then the boy added these priceless words, "I told the other kids not to worry. I told them that if you were alive, you'd save me, and when you saved me, they'd be saved." He remembered his father's promise. "No matter what, I'll always be there for you." 14 children were saved that day because one father was faithful. That's a gripping idea, isn't it? Right? Now, there were other parents who probably weren't blessed that way that day, but this man made a difference because he says, "I'm going to be faithful by refusing to give up." Faithfulness, that's the idea of loyalty to a cause. Faithfulness doesn't always bring immediate rewards. This is important to remember. We live in a culture and a time when we like things instantly, right? That's why fast food, you can go and get food in minutes if you want it, or instant coffee, or all those other instant things in life. Some of them are not too bad. Some of them, cooking them the long way is probably still better. In Revelation 2:13, another word from Jesus says, "I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast my name, and did not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you where Satan dwells." These people, many of them, were faithful unto death, and they didn't get any accolades for it, didn't bring immediate rewards. Faithfulness doesn't mean God's going to get you out of every jam. George Bolt worked faithfully for years at the front desk of a small hotel. One day, an elderly couple came into the lobby and asked for a place to stay. Every room in the hotel and every hotel in town was occupied. Realizing that the elderly couple had nowhere to sleep, Bolt offered them his own room. Although they were reluctant to accept his offer, they eventually did so because George insisted. The next morning, when the couple was checking out, the elderly man said to George, "You're the kind of man who should be managing the best hotel in the country. Someday I'm going to build that hotel and let you manage it." Well, this was several years later. Bolt received a letter in the mail. It contained a round-trip ticket and a note from the man to whom he had given his room 2 years before. The man invited George to visit him in New York City. When Bolt arrived in New York, the gentleman took him to a downtown corner where a huge building stood. "George," he said, "this is the hotel I built for you to manage." Bolt stared in amazement at the glorious structure. The hotel was the Waldorf Astoria. The elderly man was William Waldorf Astor, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Bolt's faithfulness years before in managing a small motel had prepared him to manage one of the most magnificent hotels this country has ever seen. Just a seemingly small act of faith, right? Here, you take my room. Didn't have any necessary reward in that for years, but lo and behold, something happened later. Sometimes it works with spiritual faith that way. Seeds planted, maybe at an earlier time, don't sprout till later. Don't give up when you're not rewarded for your faith immediately. That happens at times, and those are good feelings, aren't they? But it's another thing to be faithful and do it, whether you're going to be rewarded or not. Maybe that's the best way to say it. God's going to handle some rewards. Peter?
Well, for another example, several years ago, they were talking about a high school team that had lost, had never won a game. They had something like 53 losses or something, but they still had a full group would show up for practice and everything. And as it turned out, several of them actually
Yeah, some of you maybe said it, or maybe it was something we read, it's easy to be faithful when you're winning. And sometimes it's not, maybe it's, rethink that a bit. Sometimes it's harder to be faithful when everything's successful. The Bible warns about that, doesn't it? God says, I'm taking you into a land where you're going to have houses you didn't build and vineyards you didn't plant, and all these good things are going to happen. And what does God say? Be careful when that happens. So maybe success isn't always the best thing for us. Good example, faithfulness also means staying true to the mission that we're called to be faithful to. In Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8, we have this example in Jesus. Jesus had a mission when he left heaven and came to earth. Paul writes about it this way. Philippians 2, starting in verse 8. Really, Philippians 2 starts with Paul calling those brothers and sisters to live a life like they should be living. And then he says, Jesus is the perfect example of just what I'm trying to encourage you to do. Here's how he said it. It says, have this attitude, or mind, your version might say, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men. Whenever I read that text, I think Jesus didn't leave heaven on that mission kicking and screaming and hanging on the doors. And Father, I don't want to do this. He came willingly. He did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself more by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And that's a great example of being faithful to the mission we're called to. One more story, and then the class will be yours. George Lucas's 2012 film entitled Red Tails provides a dramatized version of true events behind a group of World War II soldiers called the Tuskegee Airmen. Quite a story. Formerly, they belonged to the 332nd Fighter Group and the 477th Bombardment Group of the U.S. Army Air Corps. The nickname Red Tails was coined after the group painted the tails of their aircraft red. The Tuskegee Airmen became famous for two reasons. Number one, the first was that they were the first African-American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces, and that's an achievement in and of itself. But the Red Tails hold a special significance in American history, not just racially, but militarily. In the European Air War, U.S. bombers were getting shot down at increasingly alarming rates. The problem arose when the enemy attacked. Fighter pilots protecting the bombers would leave the bomber to engage the enemy aircraft. Though this seemed like the obvious response, it meant leaving the bombers vulnerable to attack. Each lost bomber carried a crew of 10 or 11 Americans. The Tuskegee Airmen were brought in and given a different strategy. Never leave the bombers. Never. Regardless of what was happening around them. When the enemy attacked, stay the course and defend your mission, your charge. The result of their steadfast devotion, only 25 of the hundreds of bombers they protected during the war were lost. Their stellar reputation became legend. If you flew a bomber, guess what? You wanted the Red Tails with you. On the movie screen, the Tuskegee Airmen gather around each other on an airstrip in a foreign land and shout their motto. The last plane, the last bullet, the last man, the last minute, we fight. The Tuskegee Airmen were celebrated not just because they were excellent pilots, and they were, but because they never wavered from their duty. They never left their charge. You remember? Never leave the bomber. No matter what's going on, no matter what happened, they remained faithful to their calling. And that's, I guess, my hope for all of us this morning. No matter what's going wrong or right around us, the bombs going off in life, that happens. Never leave the course. Be faithful to your calling. Closing thoughts? Time is up.
It's
Nope.
important to be faithful when no one's looking.
Say that again, Nick.
It's important to be faithful even when no one's looking.
Yeah. Be faithful when no one's looking. Yeah. Especially then.
Especially.
All right. Thank you so much for your thoughts this morning, and be faithful.